Boom, there you go. You saw the tweet earlier today. You know who's here. It's a guy who's been around these parts many, many times. Mr. Terry Koshan. How's it going tonight, Terry?
Good guys. How you doing?
Pretty good, Terry. Good to see you. Good to have you back on tonight.
You too.
Yeah, no, I'm fired up for this one because obviously there's a lot of meat on the bone to talk about. Past couple of weeks, we touched on it just before we jumped on, so let's jump right into it. The Dubas presser. When you were there, what did you feel? What did you see? Obviously, Kyle Dubas now, he said maybe I was a bit too honest. Did you get a vibe that maybe he was going or wanting to stay? That day kind of felt like to me was 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Yeah. Well, as we found out later, it really was that way, right, James? And to be honest with you, when I left the presser, got back up to the press box at the practice rink, transcribed and wrote, I drove home that day thinking, okay, I think he's going to be back. I just think he will be. I guess the part of him saying it's here or nowhere else, I was taking the here part of it with a little more, seriousness than it was the or anywhere else part of that quote that really got us all going. So I just thought, well, there's still some things to work out. And I would imagine that by the end of the week, we'll have an announcement that Dubas has been signed to an extension, and that's that. Well, that wasn't that. And we know, as to hear Brendan Shanahan's side of it a few days later, 4 days later, guys, those days unfolded in a certain way. And, Dubas hasn't really touched on any of those things. But by the end of the week, as we know, it was done. And within not even 2 weeks, there was the successor in Brad Treliving. But I think that I thought that way, guys. And I think a lot of us did who were at the rink that day. We're leaning toward, okay, well, they'll get this worked out and he'll be back.
Now, I asked that question because I listened to what Dubas said, going into Pittsburgh, and he didn't even reference the Toronto Maple Leafs at all.
Yeah.
Where Shanahan and Treliving and everyone during their press conference, which we'll touch on in a moment, were very complimentary of Kyle Dubas and the work that he had done, time that he's been with the organization, which you expect. But for Kyle Dubas to really say almost nothing other than the comment about maybe I was too honest that day, I'm wondering if there's some hard feelings or bitter feelings from Dubas leaving and then, not getting what he wanted. For me, I look at it as like maybe Pittsburgh presented him everything, said, here's what we're going to give you. And he took that offer and said, hey, guys, the Maple Leafs, this is what they're offering. Not saying it that way, but saying, I know I can get this. So if you don't give me this, I'm gone. I'm wondering if that was what it was and hoping maybe he'd get that.
I don't know. I think that's a speculation. I don't know if that happened or not. I just, with him not referencing the Leafs, definitely some bitterness. No one has said to me that Kyle Dubas was a bitter man, but I think you can read between those lines and come to that conclusion. Because, guys, it's out of character for Kyle Dubas to not go to his way to think, never mind the Leafs. You don't want to, I guess there's a road he can go down here. He can thank certain people, but he doesn't thank Shanahan. That's not a great look. I'm thinking of Barry Tannenbaums of the world, of course, the relationship he had with his coach and Sheldon Keefe, and will still have going forward. You start naming names but not others, then it's probably a worse look, to be honest. But the fact it wasn't anybody, leads me to believe that Kyle Dubas was a bitter man. Not only with the way that it ended, but I think with the way Brendan Shanahan was so honest with us on the 19th of May and said, okay, from my side, here's how all of this unfolded. James, I really don't think there was something in his back pocket with Pittsburgh until he got the phone on Saturday. That's just my opinion on it. I could be wrong, but I do take Kyle for his word when he says that he's on the phone and a 617 area code number pops up the day after he's fired. Now, having said that, listen, the talk to Pittsburgh was happening during the winter, right? During the second half of the season, whispers started to come out that the Penguins would be interested in the event that Kyle Dubas would become available. So a lot of us thought here, well, that's just not going to happen. But yeah, overall, that was a very weird day, guys. You have the Treliving hiring while that is happening, or right before Pittsburgh announces Dubas. Dubas comes an hour and a half later. You look at your TV screen again. There's Spencer Carberry being introduced in Washington. It was a hell of a day for that sort of thing. And that's not, then you have Nick Nurse and Philly going on the same day as well. It was quite a June 1st. We're not going to see that repeated, but the way that Dubas and Treliving, or Treliving Dubas, went back to back within hours of each other, timing was interesting.
Very weird timing.
You can announce it and say we'll do the presser at 4, but we're barely getting into listening again to what Treliving said before Dubas was speaking in Pittsburgh. Of course, no time for any Toronto media to get there either. Well played.
No, for sure. Well, we'll get into the Treliving press conference here in a moment. I want to ask this question. I've asked a couple of people this one. Do you feel, and I mean, you listen to some of the rumors and stuff like that of what Dubas wanted. He wanted more control, more of a streamlined, narrative to the board and to Larry Tannenbaum to get his ideas through and push his agenda. But unfortunately, that wasn't given to him. I'm wondering for all the things we've ever heard, you can see on the side there, do we believe that maybe Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, with it being a board, with it being Larry Tannenbaum, and so many steps to get things done, do you think that becomes an issue for any GM? And I say that because Brian Burke was one of the ones who highly, trumpeted, I need full autonomy. I need to make sure that I have every choice that I need to make this the best team. I'm wondering if that becomes a hindrance to guys who are supposed to be the general manager.
Well, I suppose it's a hindrance if you're the guy in that chair. All I know is that there aren't many general managers who have full autonomy in the National Hockey League, including, I might add, the guy that is going to be named the GM in Pittsburgh. Is he going to get the full autonomy that Kyle Dubas wanted in that same position in Toronto? I don't think so. Not happening. So it's a bit of a fallacy to believe that, that was ever going to be part of the deal. Was there more of a streamlining thing that he wished for? Yeah, it sounds like it. So you're not going, if you want something done, step A, B, C, and right back down the ladder again. And let's face it, guys, I would think that we're not talking about minor deals here. If you want to acquire Luke Shen for a third-round pick, whatever it was, I don't imagine it has to be rubber stamped by 5 people before that happens, right? But on the bigger things, perhaps, that was part of it. And, we'll see how this goes with Brad Treliving. But again, there just aren't that many people in that position, who have that sort of autonomy. And, I still think it's a little interesting the way that Kyle Dubas played all that in that final week, leading to that Friday that he was firing, if we're to believe what Brandon Shanahan had to say about it. But, more of a streamlining, sure. I guess you can always have that sort of thing. But, we always thought that there was a good relationship between Kyle and Brendan. We're learning perhaps now that it wasn't as good this last year, that things are a bit strained. But relationships in that business world also get to be like that. So, I don't know. You know what? We'll see how it goes with Treliving. But I think the fact that there is a bit of a past there with Brendan Shanahan will help. He has a past, as he said, with Brandon Pridham. That's going to help as well. But, I think we should remember in all of this, too, that talk about streamlining and autonomy. The goal of the president and the GM is the same. It's to win the Stanley Cup.
It is.
And so you might have disagreements along the way. We all have bosses, guys. We all disagree with them at times. It's going to happen.
It's never a perfect world, to be honest. I mean, there's always going to be room for one side opinion and the other side of the opinion, and then what's right in the middle sometimes. Speaking of Brad Treliving, we brought him up a few times now. Gets introduced as the general manager for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And really, I want to walk through him just getting there and kind of soaking everything in.
Yeah.
He really looked like a kid in a candy store. His eyes were wide, just the amount of media that was there, watching him walk through the locker room, the medical room, all the different spots throughout. They had a camera on him, and you could just see whoa, okay, this is a lot different than what I'm kind of used to. Did you guys get that vibe down there when the press conference was happening, kind of from him, where it was not overwhelming, but just wow, this is another level than what I'm used to?
Yeah, I don't think he was overwhelmed at all. In fact, I found him, and we all did, I think, to be quite comfortable during that 25 minutes or so, guys. And I think that's important to note, that he wasn't overwhelmed by it. And, not that he would be. I mean, he's been around the block. He's 53 years old. He's got quite a bit more experience than Kyle Dubas has or had. And I won't compare the two anymore. But, I thought he was good that day. I just like the basic theme of it was, look, I just want to come in, talk to these people, get to know people, smooth some waters here. We do, although it doesn't look like it, have a bit more time on our side until July 1. There still is now. We have 3 weeks to go. So I just saw a guy that was comfortable. But to your point, James, you did say a few times, there are jobs, and then there's this one. This is the Leafs. This is a different thing altogether. And there are many Leaf haters across fandom in the National Hockey League. I get it. That's fine. But the fact of the matter is, it's a job that's coveted by many, and the pressure that comes with it. So by no means will Brad Treliving take this for granted. Not that I don't even need to say that. We know that. I just like the day that he was comfortable. He had a few good one-liners. That joke about Giordano playing at 75 was pretty good.
Yeah.
Mark hearing that would appreciate that. A few other things. I'm not sure if it was caught on camera, but I know at the end, when everything was done, he looked at Brendan and said, I have one more thing to say. And he'd forgotten to thank his wife and 2 daughters who were sitting right in the front row. He had some funny things to say about them, about that as well. And just the way he wrapped it all up. But I just saw a guy who, was comfortable and ready to hit the ground running. And I think that's important to note.
Right. Now, he's coming into one of the biggest off seasons in team history. What do you think his first acquisition is going to be? Is he going to try to sign Matthews? Is he going to try to sign some UFAs, RFAs? What do you think he's going to do here, Terry?
Well, I think when Matthews gets signed, we don't know. The first thing he has to do, though, is find out what Austin's thinking. And if we're all thinking that what Austin Matthews said to us on May 15th, my intent is to sign here, the sooner the better, then on the player's side that he wants to get something done. July 1st, the hammer that he holds gets a little bit bigger. We know that with the no move. So I think that'll be the first thing, Pete, is just to get into that door, and Treliving probably already has, seeing that's almost been a week since he was hired. Get Austin's thoughts on things, meet him in person, all that. As we're led to believe, there are conversations ongoing with Sheldon Keefe in his future, so that's key as well. Mm-hmm. So you have some time here, and we know he's not going to be part of the draft per se. He's not going to be at the table and all that, but he is going to still have a role, I would think, in helping to shape that. But the fact of the matter is, you got Matthews, you got Keefe, Nylander's another priority, one that we haven't. We're only not talking about it only because of what's going on with Austin Matthews. If there was no Matthews contract situation that was done, we'd be talking a lot more about Willie Nylander and what he can expect to get from the Leafs on an extension. So there's that to take care of as well. RFAs, I would like to think that he'll get down to brass tacks with Ilya Samsonov at some point being the most important. And, the free agents, I'm curious to see how it goes. The Leafs have 10. I think there's mutual interest of Luke Schenn. He's the type of defenseman that Brad Treliving likes.
Love that.
If you could wave a wand and say, we'd like to get Ryan O'Reilly back, they probably would like to, but dollars in the cap will tell you that's not going to happen. Ditto Michael Bunting. If it were up to me, I'd be signing Noel Chari and David Camp and retaining them, and then casting your line July 1 to see what you can get. But so that's where it's going to go. I'm of the same belief as others guys. I think the goaltending's fine. I actually wrote that for our website tomorrow's paper that they don't need Carter Hart. You're okay and not okay in that. You're better than okay. You have Samsonov who's building. Joe Wall is an NHLer.
He looks so good.
Yes.
He'll need waivers next year. He's not getting past waivers.
Well, I made that comment today. Why would you give up assets when you finally, after years upon years, developed a goaltender and now he's ready to play within your system? And now you want to go again, kind of do what you did to James Reimer. If you bring in Carter Hart, then it's Samsonov and Hart. And where does Woll go? Back down to the minors. And then, like you said, he's got to clear waiver. You're going to lose him. So makes no sense.
And the other thing, too, guys, if you're acquiring Carter Hart, the assumption is it's not to be a tandem, but to be a number one. So can you guarantee today or tomorrow that Carter Hart will supply better goaltending than Ilya Samsonov? No. And not only can you not do that, you've also seen probably a first-round pick and or at least Matthew Knies go the other way.
Yeah. I'm not spending the assets. I would rather roll the dice on Joseph Woll or someone in your system. They have a bunch of young goaltenders now that they may be able to use.
Yeah, they are. It's funny. I went through the goaltending today, and I used as my jumping off point Felix Potvin. So he's taken in the 31st overall in 1990. We know what he did in the 90s, guys, that decade. He started for the Leafs.
Yep.
Since then, between Potvin and Wall, the Leafs drafted 18 goalies. I think 11 or 12 never stepped foot in the NHL. And 5 of them played in Toronto, and Reimer was the best one.
Yeah,
I hate to do that for James, so I liked him a lot.
What about Tuukka?
Well, he didn't play in Toronto, right? That's just it. I mean, the best guy in the bunch, John Ferguson Jr. had Pogge here and Rask here, and he went with the 50. Look at James.
God.
Won't even start, Terry.
Brutal. That didn't go. So anyway, to get back to the whole original thing, Pete, I don't think it's an area they need to get to. It's on the defense where I think that he'll make the biggest splash. How he does that remains to be seen. But given the way he built the blue line in Calgary, he knows what he has in net. If the core four are back, he knows what he has up front. You're filling around at the edges there. I think they need to do something on the blue line to improve the group as a whole.
Well, I want to ask you about the blue line as a whole, and especially with Treliving. A lot of people want to see TJ Brody go. I'm not one of them. I like TJ Brody, like
I'm
what
a
he
big Brody
brings.
guy.
I think maybe a little bit of load management down the stretch
Yeah.
for a guy like TJ Brody who blocks a lot of shots and takes a lot of 2-on-1s and does all those different things, getting back, being defensively responsible. I don't see him going anywhere. What would you think? I think Treliving would like some familiarity with some guys there, like a Giordano, like a TJ Brody, just to have those guys within his system to work with and to kind of lean on for, players within the room and stuff like that.
That could be part of it. What does Brody have? 1 year at $5 million, I think, left.
Yeah.
Right. So, it's a bit of a pricey ticket, but does Treliving keep that familiarity in mind? And again, if you're going to move it to TJ Brody, does another team really want to take that on right now? I don't know. The big question with Brody is, was last year an aberration or the start of the decline story that comes at the end of a career? Now, if that happens, it's 5 or 6 years before anything got to Mark Giordano. You hate to compare the two, but I'm going to anyway. Giordano at that age is winning a Norris Trophy, if not mistaken, or roughly, if not a bit older, right?
Just a little bit older, yeah.
However, was he 35 when he won, I think, or 34?
35 or 36, I do believe.
Okay, so there you go. I mean, I guess it happens differently for everybody. So I'm of the mind you keep Brody. If I'm Timothy Liljegren or Jake McCabe, I don't know how comfortable I am this summer because you're not trading. Because let's go down the list. Morgan Rielly is going nowhere, right?
Nope.
He's got a no move. We saw the Morgan Rielly in the playoffs. If he can be that guy going forward, and he should be, not going anywhere, right? So then you get to Mark Giordano, who at $800,000 is going to be, I think, he is coming back to. There's no. I heard somebody whispers about retirement. That's not going to happen. At least not the plan now.
What is for that for Matt Murray? Is it?
What's that?
You're talking about Matt Murray?
No, Giordano, that there would be a possibility of retirement. I've been told it's not happening.
No.
But as far as the blue line goes, so you've got Rielly. So then if you got Giordano at the other end, you'll sign Luke Shen. Connor Timmins, for whatever reason, is under contract for the next 2 years. So that kind of narrows your scope as to who you're going to move out of there if you decide to do that. Liljegren could be that guy. Treliving's not married to Timothy Liljegren. We know that. Nor is he to Jake McCabe. He isn't to Morgan Rielly either, but Morgan Riley's a different kettle of fish. He's got the background with Brody and Giordano. So I would think that if it's a trade for defenseman, somebody will get moved out from the group. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's a McCabe or Liljegren going forward. But we'll have to see. But he likes the bigger men on the blue line. We saw that in Calgary. He has to be cognizant of the fact these people need to move the puck as well, because that's the way the Leafs play, and that's not going to change now with that forward group. So that's where I think it happens. But I guess the thing to remember too, guys, is yes, it's a team that lost in the second round, but we're still talking about a team that could get things done in the regular season, that had all those tools, right?
Yes.
So there is a lot of good things here for Brad Treliving to work with. But I think the changes will come on the blue line.
So I'm curious there. Like McCabe, for me, I mean, I like what he brought. He was blocking shots. He can throw the body. He does look like he has some foot speed. I mean, is that a guy that they'd be interested in moving? I think Timothy Liljegren would have a little bit more value and upside. But again, he's a guy who can also move the puck too. So it's I guess depending on what you're looking for, really.
I guess it does. But my point with it is you only have 6 or 7 people on the list.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a non-fit somewhere. And if you agree that, like it's a Rielly or and who am I forgetting somebody here? We got Rielly, Brody, McCabe, Liljegren, Giordano, Timmins. Those are the 6 under contract, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the 6 under contract right now.
One comes back. Unfortunately, I don't think there's anybody coming from the minors next year for the Leafs. There's just nobody ready to make that jump and be a full-time NHL defenseman. So it's not that I don't like McCabe, James, or Liljegren, for that matter. I like them both. But if you're going to do something, you've got to do something.
Yeah, if you're going to spend the assets, you got to.
And like we've already discussed, Matthew Nice, he's their best prospect. There's no bloody way he should be going anywhere.
No, he looks so good in the playoffs. I was
shocked.
No,
I'm pretty excited to see what he can do with a full season under his belt, and probably getting to play with an Austin Matthews or a Mitch Marner or whoever it may be in that top 6. A player I want to ask you about, obviously, he's going to have to be probably put back on LTIR, but there's nothing for certain yet. and that's Jake Muzzin.
Yeah.
He hasn't retired.
I think that's where he's headed.
But that kind of puts the Leafs in a bind, really, because if he's heading to LTIR, don't you have to wait until the first day of the season to place him there and be able to get his cap relief?
Right, but I think you'll have that in mind once you're building toward that, right? So
yeah, I just see the Leafs maybe wanting to move that contract, so to speak, in the offseason.
Well, I hadn't thought about it, but I suppose that could happen. If you need to get it to a team that has to quote unquote get to the basement or whatever, the floor, however you want to put it. Yeah. I suppose that could happen, but as of right now, yeah, unfortunately, I don't think he's going to be playing regardless of the situation, no matter where that is. And that's tough with Jake Muzzin, guys. I mean, 4 games last season in October, and that was it.
Yeah.
Suffered injury that he did. And, we never did talk to him. I think we did request a few times. He just wasn't up for it, which is fine. Completely respect that. But just watching him watch practice was hard because he had a bit of that stare into the look, and just knowing that probably I'm not going to be out there with those guys again.
Yeah,
we'll have to see how that plays out. But at some point, that's going to be money that they can rely on, whether it's the beginning of the season or not. We'll have to see.
Yeah, true enough. I mean, it allows them to do things. I mean, I've seen it also hamper them as well when it came to moving guys around. Another player that I want to ask you about is Matt Murray.
Yeah, he was the other one. Yeah.
The other guy that I don't know if he's going to be on LTIR, but I think that's a guy that I think he still wants to play. So he's not going anywhere. So you probably have to figure a way to either buy him out, which Maple Leafs might do, and eat some of that money, or attach an asset to him and send him out the door like you did with Peter Mrazek, which I know I just heard the collective groan of Leafs Nation for them sending another goalie out the door. But I mean, if you can get his cap relief of $4.25 or whatever it is, $4 million,
almost 4.7, yeah.
Yeah, if you can have that money to be able to do things on July 1, and maybe it saves you a Bunting or a Ryan O'Reilly or someone like that because you now have that change in your pocket, that might be something worth exploring.
It could. I think some of that money will go back towards the guy that beat him out, though, right? Samsonov,
Yes.
He's an RFA. He's not. I guess he'll be qualified at 1.8. That's not going to happen. He'll sign for more than that, I would think, when all is said and done. Whether that gets into forward territory, we'll have to see. But that would be what I expect, right?
How much term do you think he gets?
I don't know. It's hard to say. Maybe does he get 3-4 years?
I would say 3-year bridge deal.
He's going to be 27 in February, I think. So he's in the wheelhouse for age for a goalie, right? Not too old, not too young. He's in that right spot. And I think he's earned it. What did Peter Mrazek get? 3-year deal here?
He got a 3-year deal, yeah.
Well, look, I know it's a different person. And I said I wasn't going to compare again. But the fact is, if Mrazek is getting that 3 years, then Samsonov should be able to say, look, I at least deserve that, if not maybe one more year. So we'll see where that goes. But again, you're keeping in mind that you don't want to go too far down the road and hook yourself into Samsonov, which the balance will have to strike, because Joe Wall is the guy we think he's going to be. He'll be up in 2 years, and he's going to probably command quite a bit more as well. So, you don't want to get into a spot where you're paying both your goalies $4 or $5 million, obviously, over a longer period of time.
It runs into what the Florida Panthers just had happen with Sergei Bobrovsky and Spencer Knight, right? You had to pay both of them.
Yeah.
And then you're on the hook for, $14 million for 2 goaltenders. Not to say the Leafs will be in the same realm, but you're still paying a lot of money out to 2 goalies. So
right. I guess for the Panthers, at least, until they met the Vegas Golden Knights, it looked like they were going to be okay with that situation. But
it looked like they were fine with eating that money.
Well, but again, I'm sorry, I'm not going to. One thing I'll say is I'm not going to write the Panthers off yet.
No. No one's writing the Panthers off yet.
Yeah, no. But I mean, just as far as Murray goes, I think it behooves Treliving to get out from under that somehow before training camp starts. Go figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, figure something out. There's got to be a move to be had. The other thing that I'm wondering too. Okay, we'll move from Treliving. We'll talk about Austin Matthews and what he may command on his next deal. And I kind of have a working theory here. The cap goes up probably $1 million this year is what Gary Bettman said. Okay. And then if you are to believe what he's saying, it's supposed to go up $4 or $5 million next season, the season after this one, which coincides with Austin Matthews and William Nylander's new deals starting. So if you factor that in, and if you are able to factor some of that in, hopefully, if you're giving Austin Matthews, say, he got 11 million, a $3 million raise to $14 million, somewhere around that back. And then William Nylander is at 7 just per se. I know it's 6'9", but he gets bumped up to $9 million pasta money, David Pastrnak style. There's your cap bump right there spent on those two players. Right. And you really don't have to worry about finding that $3 million and finding that $2 million if the cap goes there. I know it's a big if, especially with everything that happens, but it's a pretty good feeling that it's going to go to those numbers. You look at all of the other leagues, everybody else has jumped up 18, 20, 24% in their salary cap or luxury tax. So the NHL would be smart to finally maybe start moving that ball forward and getting things where teams can spend money and build better teams, just because I know there's price tags on teams being sold and, there's money being made left, right, and center that the players don't get to see. But I think, to go back to Austin Matthews, that money coming in, and for William Nylander as well, you may be able to factor that and move those guys up and not lose them, is the only thing I'm saying.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I mean, as long as that cap does rise after this year, like it's expected to.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah,
but that's the way things look, right? So, barring something that we've all just lived through the past 3 years, that should happen. And keeping in mind too that when they were signed to the deals that they're on now, all of them, no one was anticipating what was going to happen. We thought now that the cap would be like, what was I think the last GM's meeting before the pandemic started, what were they saying? 88 million for the next
88
year?
million. I think we did this one before. I think we were in the realm now where it should be like 103 million is what the cap should probably be at now, which, I mean, just think of how much that would have helped the Maple Leafs. You know what I mean?
Oh, it would have been then, unfortunately, you like on the blue line, for example, you don't have that big stud coming open right now on free agency, but maybe you would have been able to add some other way. But you know what? That seems to be the idea, that Matthews is going to look for about a 3-year deal. I don't know, how much longer than that it goes. We'll have to see. 14 million, I think, would be about the right sort of number he's probably going to seek.
Yep.
William Nylander, that's an interesting one, for all we know.
Want a big pay raise.
What's that?
He's going to want a big pay raise, right? Like, he took a
sure.
big
And you know what? If you're Louis Gross's agent, what if you walk in and your first thing is to say, I want Marner or Matthews money? I'm not saying that's going to happen, but
no,
the
I
fact
mean,
of the matter is, like you say, he's headed for a ways too, right?
Yeah. So, I look at William Nylander, I'd say the best William Nylander we've gotten was last year. Yep. And he was one of the best players in the playoffs. For everybody who says this guy has his warts and problems and all the issues and everything else that people point out, at the same time, he put the team on his back in the playoffs a little bit and scored goals when they were key crunch time goals. And he was a 40-goal scorer. So I look at this guy and say, okay, people are going to say, well, Cole Caulfield just signed for less money. Yeah. Well, Cole Caulfield hasn't shown that he's a 40, 50-goal scorer consistently. He hasn't put up the points. He hasn't gone on, many seasons of showing what he can do. Where William Nylander seems like maybe he's stepping into that stride. And I say Pastrnak money because that's probably the comparable that he's going to have with inflation. And you'll say, his number was 9 at this point in time. Well, mine's 9 now because that's the way the cap's going to end up going at that point in time. So, I mean, how much do you pay for 40 goals? I mean, people say he did it once. Well, he was pretty close a couple of other times. So I look at $9 million and say that's probably what a goal scorer is worth, and Cole Caulfield signed for what he did because it's kind of like Nathan McKinnon when he signed his first deal. He didn't exactly have the point totals, but they were banking on what he could be. And boy, oh boy, did he outperform that contract in spades. And that's what Montreal is hoping that Cole Caulfield does, is blows that contract out of the water and looks like a steal.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's obviously they would hope for that. But as far as it pertains to William Nylander, $9-10 million. Again, if we're anticipating the cap to grow like it will, like you're saying, James, then much easier to swallow and deserving of where the players where his expectations would then lie. Because you're right, 40 goal scorers, there aren't many of them. There are some, but there are not a lot. Nylander is a guy that, to be quite honest, if he's fully healthy, it could hit 50 in the National Hockey League.
I fully see it.
Has that talent to do it. But I hate to say this, put it this way, but when his head is in it, which I should say is 95% of the time, we tend to look at the 5% it's not a little too much in my opinion. But 95% of the time when his head is in it, we see what kind of player he is and what he's capable of. And, does he seem a little bit aloof? I guess, but to me, that's a bit of a facade. I don't think that's the way he approaches the game. There are other ways, you'd like to see. You'd like the coach, if it's Sheldon Keefe next year or somebody else, and we do think it's going to be Keefe, you don't get to a point where you don't have to light a bit of a fire under Willie Nylander, right? Because you're not doing that with Mitch Marner or Austin Matthews now.
Yeah.
That's a difference there. You're not with John Tavares, although we're talking with a different player. We're talking about a guy who's I think best days are behind him and really has to work for everything he gets. But the effort is unquestioned. So, it's interesting. Again, let's circle back to the splash of the blue line. If Treliving really does that, does then Nylander become part of the package going the other way? If you're going to make that big splash for a number one stud on your blue line, could be, right? Because as we discussed before, guys, if you want to make those deals, and Brad Treliving's not afraid to do it, what was the one he made with Carolina a few years ago involving Dougie Hamilton and was it Elias?
Yeah, you got Lindholm, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not just the Kachuk trade, which he was obviously forced on him and one he didn't want him to make. He does have a history of it, so we'll see where that goes. But Nylander is a great player for the Maple Leafs, and if he can be included in a package to go somewhere else, then we know that the guy coming back is going to be a hell of a player as well.
Oh, it'll definitely be an impact player for the Maple Leafs. Well, you touched on another topic that we have for tonight, and that is Sheldon Keefe.
Yeah.
The belief out there, Elliot Friedman put it out there, a few others as well now, that it looks like Brad Treliving is probably at least going to keep him this year. I would say you probably would extend him because you don't want a coach to be a lame duck.
Right.
And, not have really any teeth to bite back at guys if things are going sideways a little bit. What would you give him? I would say maybe a year extension just to get a feel of what he is. And if things go well beyond that, obviously you can talk and figure things out beyond that. But if you give him that extra year, at least if you do end up letting him go like you did with Hartley in Calgary, then you're not paying like you did with Babcock for multiple years on a tab. But again, it's hard for me to say that you're going to go get a better coach than Sheldon Keefe. Has Sheldon Keefe had to learn some things on the job? Yes.
Sure.
The coach doesn't. Yeah. It's a learning league. It's always a learning league. You ask any coach, you learn something new every day. You got to figure things out. New things are always cropping up. There's people that'll say, hey, Sheldon Keefe doesn't know how to switch the lines up in the playoffs and mix and match things. I can say, well, he ran 11-7 this year through the playoffs and really did mix and match things and put guys in better positions to score, and it worked out this year. Just the second round, it seemed like it petered out. But for you, Terry, if you're Brad Treliving with Sheldon Keefe, what would you give him, and would you keep him?
Yes, I would keep him 1 year for sure, perhaps 2, but top it out at 2. For the reasons you talk about, James. Look, Sheldon Keefe is not a bad coach. And there are a lot of good coaches out there on the open market right now, veteran guys who have done it. I come at you with this. Sheldon Keefe has been coaching in the National Hockey League for less than 4 years. Less than 4 years. Okay? We can talk about play and everything else, who did what in the playoffs. He beat a pretty good coach in the first round.
John Coops, yep.
Yeah.
I would beat John Coops, longest tenured current coach. I'd put him up against anybody. He lost to a coach in the second round who, what is he, the top 5 coaches, all-time game coach, I think, Paul Maurice. Yep. He's right up there.
Something like that.
Doing it forever.
Yeah.
And we see how he's been able to take this team now to, within 4 wins of the Stanley Cup final, or the Stanley Cup. Fact of the matter is, he went up against 2 wily veterans of the NHL who have seen everything and experienced everything. One of them he beat, the other one, of course, you want a better result against. Sheldon Keefe is still learning. Of course, there are some things that he's going to do that aren't going to be, overly agreeable to a lot of the fan base. But fact of the matter is, he got a team again to well over 100 points in the regular season, those things don't happen by accident. He was given 6 new players, I think it was, at the trade deadline, made them work for the most part, made those things work, was able to go 11-7, move things around. I don't have too much of a question with his coaching methods. If I'm sitting here and saying to Sheldon Keefe, well, I'm going to question you at 110, 111 points at every turn, and show me the guy who then is a perfect candidate who gets you the same amount of points. There aren't many out there. Why we're seeing retreads now. It's why Mike Babcock's getting a job in Columbus, and why the 2 front runners were led to believe in New York are Peter Laviolette and John Hines, or at least they were until 24 hours ago. Yeah. So, if you want to go down that path, you can. But Sheldon Keefe, I think his best days are ahead of him. I was on the radio a few weeks ago. I was here at the Fan in Toronto. I said, look, I think Kyle Dubas will win a Stanley Cup somewhere. This is before he got hired in Pittsburgh, I think. And he's that young. He's already has that type of experience. He's got that in his future. How old is Sheldon Keefe now? 42, 43? He's a young hockey coach. Only Spencer Carberry is younger than him. He's got a great future ahead of him, and there's no reason why he shouldn't be here for at least the next year or two.
Yeah, no, I want to see what he can do. Obviously, there's going to be new fingerprints on the team with Brad Treliving and bringing guys in. And, we know what Brad Treliving likes as well. More physicality. He likes bigger defensemen. He likes the big guys and stuff like that. So you'll see that infused into the Leafs and the people that he brings in. Lastly, before we let you go tonight, there's a lot of rumblings. We talked about a little bit earlier about Carter Hart maybe coming in and big deals maybe shaking out and stuff like that. Do you feel in your gut that we get a big deal from the Maple Leafs this summer with someone moving? Or do you think they augment and bring in guys like Treliving said, to play around these world-class players and make it a better 23-man roster, not just about the core 4?
Well, if we're reading the tea leaves right and the whispers, I think they will do something significant on the blue line. And like I alluded to, guys, if that significant, how big is that? Well, the bigger you want to return, the bigger you have to send out. So does that include a William Nylander? We'll have to see. Do I think that the Leafs more or less are going to look the same in spring training camp? No, I don't. I really don't. I think that Brad Treliving, as much as he had a bit of a let's calm the waters approach in his first news conference last week.
Smart thing to do, though.
Very smart. I think that he'll want to put his own stamp on this team. And all due respect, that is not re-signing David Campbell that they should do, or filling out your bottom 6, or signing depth guys on the blue line. You're going to want to make that stamp somehow with the player acquisition. And if we're talking again when camp starts, guys, I would be surprised if they haven't done something of fairly significant, whether that's through a trade. If you look at the free agent market right now, you're not getting that player on the open market. They just don't exist. All due respect, when Damon Severson and Dmitry Orlov are your top defensemen that you think are going to go, or it's Ryan O'Reilly or at forward Michael Bunting, guys that they're not able to retain, I think it's going to come via trade. So we'll have to see, but I think he'll put a stamp on it to a fairly significant degree.
I think he'll put a stamp on this team, and to everyone who thinks – I see a lot of Leaf fans are, I would say, upset with the second round loss, the way that it happened, and then the Dubas situation. A lot of people are worried this team is going to go and plummet to the bottom of the East standings. I don't think that is happening at all, unless you end up losing Matthews and Nylander and trading them both and for nuts and bolts or whatever, and you don't get anything returned back, which is not going to happen.
No, it won't happen.
I think this team, again, will be one of the 1, 2, 3 in the Atlantic next season, and they will look different. I fully agree, but I think there'll be a lot of elements that'll be the same. Your goaltending, I think you'll see Samsonov and Woll as a tandem for the year. I do think you'll see Noah Chari back, Luke Shen. I do think that Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and Tavares will be there in some capacity, but I think the rest of it's open for business. Yeah. And there's a lot of young guys that might make a jump, like a Pontus Holmberg, might get the chance to fill in and be that David Camp, even though, like I beat the drum all year long, his face-off numbers were no good. He really needs to work on it to be that fourth-line center. But then you got Matthew Nyes. Nick Robertson apparently is beefing up as well, and they're going to want to give him the best chance to possibly succeed, or maybe he gets thrown into a package. Who knows? But I think that's a player they're banking on being top 9 capable, along with Matthew Nyes. So then you start filling it in.
And cheaply. That's the thing you got to remember. Matthew Nyes, nothing under the cap. Joseph Wall, nothing under the cap. Nick Robertson, nothing under the cap. They're all capable of making really good contributions next year. And if they do, at the numbers they're going to be paid, that can only turn out well for the Leafs. There's no doubt.
Yeah, you can definitely add more players and do more things. Well, I look forward to, as we always do in the summertime, talking to you maybe a week or so after free agency kicks off, because that's when you finally figure out what happened at the draft and UFA. But I'd love to get you back on and just see what's there like we do, and take some guests and some run at the roster of what may play with who or who may play with what, like we did last year with Calle Yarncroke and the guys. So I always appreciate you giving us some time, Terry.
Yep. Thanks for having me, guys. It's always good to talk to you. Sure.
Thanks for coming on, Terry.
All right, well, Leafs Nation and hockey fans, this is Offside Hockey Talk, where the Maple Leafs and hockey come to talk.